In the fog-bound streets of Copenhagen, Eric Van Dad dies clutching a torn blackmail ledger. 5 souls owed him ruin, 1 owed him death. A stolen green cloak, 3 planted buttons, a scream swallowed by mist. I am Hercule Poirot. With 8 chapters of ice, secrets, and little gray cells, I will cut through the fog and name the killer before the tide washes the truth away. Chapter 1. The Telegram from the North. Hercule Poirot laid down his cup of chocolate with the precision of a man who has measured the exact angle at which the porcelain must rest upon the saucer. The fire in the grate had sunk to a sullen glow. Outside, the London fog pressed against the windows of his flat like a living thing, yellow and sullen. It was the 23rd of January, and the year, though young, had already begun to weary him. He rose, adjusted the alignment of the 3 silver photograph frames upon the mantel, and crossed to the window. Baker Street lay below, muffled in wool. A hansom cab clopped past, its driver hunched like a question mark. Poirot's mustaches, those magnificent monuments to order and symmetry, drooped ever so slightly with the oppression of inactivity. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "even the criminals of England appear to have taken a winter holiday." It was at that precise moment that the bell rang. 3 short, decisive peals. Poirot's eyebrows ascended. Visitors at 10:30 in the morning were rare. Visitors who rang with such authority were rarer still. He smoothed an invisible crease from his waistcoat and proceeded to the door. The telegraph boy stood upon the threshold, cap askew, cheeks scarlet from the cold. In his gloved hand he clutched a yellow envelope. "For Monsieur Poirot," he announced, thrusting it forward. Poirot received it with a murmur of thanks, pressed a shilling into the boy's palm, and closed the door. The envelope was of good quality, the address typed in capitals. He slit it open with the silver knife he kept for such purposes, and drew out the flimsy sheet. The message was brief, yet it struck him like a pistol shot. "Urgent. Come to Copenhagen at once. Murder most foul. Your discretion required. Inspector K. Larsen, Politiet." Poirot read it twice. Copenhagen. The word evoked spires against a northern sky, the bronze mermaid in the harbor, the austere dignity of the Amalienborg palaces. And murder most foul. The phrase was melodramatic, almost theatrical, yet the signature carried weight. Larsen. He recalled a conference in Brussels 2 years previously. A tall Dane with a scholar's stoop and a policeman's eyes, who had spoken admiringly of Poirot's methods in the affair of the Orient Express. He folded the telegram with care and placed it upon the blotter. Then, moving with the neatness that characterized all his actions, he crossed to the wardrobe and selected his traveling valise. Small, black, and of the finest Russian leather. Within 10 minutes, it contained 2 suits of faultless cut, 3 pairs of silk socks, a dressing gown of quilted burgundy, and the inevitable tin of pomade, without which his mustaches would have mutinied. The telephone upon the side table shrilled. Poirot lifted the receiver. "Poirot, it is you?" The voice belonged to his old friend, Chief Inspector Japp, breathless with curiosity. "I've just heard from the yard. Some Danish Johnny's been asking for you. What's the game?" "My dear Japp," replied Poirot smoothly, "a little matter of murder in the fog-bound streets of Copenhagen. I depart immediately." "Fog-bound, eh? Sounds like your cup of tea. Mind you wrap up warm. Those Baltic winds'll cut you in half." Poirot smiled into the mouthpiece. "I possess, mon ami, a coat lined with the fur of the Siberian wolf. It is impervious. He rang off, summoned his valet Georges with a press of the bell, and issued crisp instructions. By 11 o'clock, the flat was locked, the fire banked, and Poirot himself sat in a first-class compartment of the boat train to Harwich, a copy of the Continental Bradshaw open upon his knee. As the train gathered speed through the sodden suburbs, he permitted himself a small sigh of satisfaction. The little gray cells, so long starved of stimulation, began to stir like cats awakening from a nap. Somewhere across the North Sea, in a city of canals and secrets, a murderer believed himself clever. Poirot twirled the end of his mustache and addressed the reflection in the window. "We shall see, mon petit, we shall see." Chapter 2. Arrival in the Pearl of the North. The night ferry from Harwich to Esbjerg had been a masterpiece of discomfort. The North Sea, in its January mood, had tossed the vessel like a cork. The cabins smelled of wet wool and boiled cabbage, and the other passengers, mostly commercial travelers with samples of linoleum and patent razors, had snored in competing keys. Hercule Poirot, who required for sleep a bed of exact dimensions and a pillow neither too hard nor too soft, had passed the hours in a state of disciplined wakefulness, reviewing in his mind the possible permutations of murder most foul. Dawn found him on deck, wrapped in the Siberian wolf coat, watching the low Danish coast emerge from a pewter sea. The light was thin and cold, the color of watered milk. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp as broken glass. By the time the ship docked, Poirot's mustaches had acquired a delicate frosting of salt, which he removed with a silk handkerchief scented with vervain. The train to Copenhagen was punctual to the minute, a fact that filled Poirot with approval. He traveled in a compartment alone, the seat opposite occupied only by his valise and a paper bag containing 2 brioches purchased at Esbjerg station. The Jutland landscape unrolled in monotonous perfection. Flat fields silvered with frost, windmills turning slowly like elderly dignitaries, and here and there a red farmstead glowing against the whiteness like a drop of fresh blood. At each stop, passengers entered and departed with the quiet efficiency of a people who believe noise to be a form of bad manners. Poirot observed them all. The stout merchant asleep with his mouth open, revealing a gold tooth that caught the light at regular intervals. The young woman in the corner knitting something scarlet with furious concentration. The priest reading a small black book and moving his lips in silent prayer. None, Poirot decided, looked capable of cutting a throat in the fog. Yet appearances, as he frequently reminded the skeptical Jap, were the stock in trade of the criminal classes. It was shortly after noon when the train drew into Copenhagen Hovedbanegade. The platform was a bustle of porters in blue uniforms, travelers clutching cardboard boxes tied with string, and the inevitable cluster of small boys selling newspapers and peppermint drops. Poirot descended with the dignity of a man who has never in his life hurried for anything, and immediately became aware of a tall figure detaching itself from the crowd. The man was perhaps 45, broad-shouldered beneath a coat of navy Melton, with a nose reddened by cold, and eyes the pale blue of glacier ice. A scar, thin and white, ran from the corner of his left eye to the edge of his mouth, giving his face a permanently quizzical expression. Herr Poirot? His English was excellent, though the R's rolled like distant thunder. Inspector Knud Larsen, Copenhagen's Politi, welcome to Denmark. Poirot inclined his head. Enchanté, Inspector. You have, I trust, reserved for me a room at the Hotel d'Angleterre. I have a prejudice in favor of its bathrooms." Larson's lips twitched. "Naturally. Your reputation precedes you." He signaled to a porter who seized the valise with alacrity and led the way to a waiting vehicle. A black Daimler saloon with the discreet insignia of the police department on its doors. They drove through streets where the snow had been swept into neat ridges along the curbs. The city was all straight lines and restraint, severe facades of yellow brick, windows framed in white, roofs of copper verdigris. Yet there was color too, the sudden blaze of a flower shop, the crimson awning of a cafe, the blue and white of the Danish flag snapping above a government building. Poirot drank it in with the appreciation of a connoisseur. "You will wish to see the body at once?" Larson asked, negotiating a corner with smooth competence. "Non, non," Poirot replied. "First I wish to see the place where the body was found. The corpse itself can wait. It will not walk away. But the atmosphere... Ah, that is another matter. One must breathe the air in which the crime was committed." Larson nodded as though this were the most reasonable request in the world. "Nijhaven, then. It is not far." The Daimler turned down a narrow street and emerged onto the quayside. Nijhaven. The name evoked pictures in Poirot's mind. Tall ships, sailors with parrots, the reek of tar and spices. The reality was quieter. The canal lay before them, a strip of black water reflecting the tall, narrow houses that lined its banks. These houses were painted in clear, pure colors: ochre, terracotta, indigo, leaf green, each with its own personality, yet harmonizing like instruments in an orchestra. Snow lay upon the window boxes. Icicles hung from the gutters like crystal daggers. The fog, which had been a mere suggestion inland, here rolled in thick waves from the harbor, swallowing the masts of the few anchored boats and turning the gas lamps into fuzzy moons. A smell of coal smoke and wet stone hung in the air. Larson drew up beside a stretch of quay where police tape fluttered dismally. A constable saluted and lifted the tape. Beneath a tarpaulin, stiff now with frost, lay the outline of a human form. "Erik van Dad," Larson said, pulling back the cover with a gesture almost gentle. 34 years old, heir to Van Dad Shipping, found at 6 this morning by a street sweeper. Poirot bent closer. The dead man had been handsome. High cheekbones, a sensual mouth now slack, fair hair matted with blood. His throat had been cut with a single, savage stroke. The wound gaped like a red grin. He wore evening dress, the white tie askew, one patent shoe missing. In the breast pocket of his coat protruded the corner of a theater program. "Time of death?" Poirot asked. "Between 11 and 1, according to the police surgeon. The cold makes precision difficult." Poirot's gaze traveled over the cobblestones. Blood had pooled and frozen into a black mirror. Nearby, the missing shoe lay on its side, as though kicked off in a dance. He noted the absence of footprints leading to or from the body. The fog and the subsequent traffic of police boots had obliterated them. But something else caught his eye. A brass button, naval issue, half buried in the crack between two stones. With the delicacy of a surgeon, he extracted it and held it to the light. The anchor device was unmistakable. Beneath it, the initials VS for Van Dad Shipping. "Curious," he murmured. "The victim wore no such coat, and yet here is a button from the uniform of his own company." Larson's scar twitched. "We have questioned the night watchman. He saw nothing, heard nothing. The fog, you understand. Poirot replaced the button in a small envelope and tucked it into his waistcoat pocket. Tell me of this Eric Vandad, a man, I suspect, with enemies. Larsen lit a cigarette, cupping the match against the wind. More than enemies, victims. The Vandad line has carried cargo since the days of the clipper ships, but Eric preferred faster profits, smuggling perhaps, blackmail certainly. 3 months ago, his uncle threatened to disinherit him. His sister Freya, well, you will meet her, has been fighting him in the courts over control of the firm. And then there is the fiancée, Fröken Ingrid Solberg of the Royal Theatre. She is beautiful, ambitious, and expensive. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, the triangle, the eternal triangle, and the base of it is money. Always money, Larsen agreed. But come, the morgue will be closing soon, and the body must be viewed properly. After that, coffee. Real coffee, not the English dishwater. They replaced the tarpaulin and returned to the car. As they drove away, Poirot glanced back once. The fog had closed in again, swallowing the colorful houses, the canal, the place of death. Somewhere in that gray curtain, a murderer walked free, believing the mist had hidden his tracks. Poirot settled back against the leather upholstery and closed his eyes. The little gray cells were already at work, arranging facts like pieces on a chessboard. The game, as he had once remarked to Hastings, had begun. Chapter 3. The Five Who Feared Him. The Vandad mansion stood upon the shore of the Øresund like a fortress of yellow brick, its windows glittering with the cold light of a winter afternoon. Snow lay thick upon the lawns. The gravel drive had been swept clear in perfect parallel lines. A maid in starched apron admitted Poirot and Inspector Larsen into a hall paneled in dark oak and smelling of beeswax and pine logs. A grandfather clock ticked with the solemnity of a judge. "Fröken Vandad will receive you in the library," the maid murmured, and led them through corridors hung with portraits of bearded sea captains, whose eyes followed the visitors with disapproval. The library was a room of crimson leather and gold lettering. Books rose to the ceiling in mahogany cases. A fire blazed beneath a mantel carved with ships in full sail. 5 people awaited them, arranged with the stiffness of actors upon a stage. Freya Vandad rose first. She was tall, with hair the color of winter wheat braided severely about her head. Her gown was black, but of a cut so elegant that mourning became merely another fashion. Her eyes were the pale gray of a northern sea before storm. "Inspector Larsen," she said, voice low and controlled. "You bring the Belgian detective. I had not thought my brother's death required foreign interference." Poirot bowed. "Mademoiselle, it is not interference, but illumination I offer. Your brother was murdered with artistry. Artistry demands appreciation." Freya's lips tightened. "Eric was no artist. He was a vandal." Larsen cleared his throat. "Fröken Vandad, if we may proceed. Herr Poirot wishes to speak with everyone who saw Eric yesterday evening." One by one, the others stepped forward, as though summoned by an invisible cue. Captain Magnus Bjarnason was a bear of a man, 60 perhaps, with a beard like frost on granite, and a scar that ran from ear to chin like a lightning bolt. His hands, when he removed his gloves, were the size of hams and trembled slightly. He wore the uniform coat of Vandad shipping, though the brass buttons were dull with age. "Captain Bjarnason and I were partners," he rumbled. "Eric wanted to sell the Greenland route. I refused. We quarreled at the Tivoli last night, publicly, but I left him alive at 10:15 and went home to my housekeeper's herring soup. Ingrid Solberg followed, an actress to her fingertips. She was small, with hair the color of ripe corn and eyes of cornflower blue. Her mourning was theatrical. Black lace, a veil that trembled when she wept. Yet Poirot noted the rouge was fresh. The tears dried before they reached the cheek. "Eric promised me the world," she said, voice breaking artistically. "A villa in Capri, pearls from the South Seas. Then he laughed and said I was expensive wallpaper. I left the theater at 11, alone. The doorman will confirm. Professor Otto Kirke was last of the principals. He was thin, almost desiccated, with a scholar's stoop and eyes that darted like trapped flies. He carried a silver-topped cane of ebony and leaned upon it as though it were the staff of Moses. "Eric was my pupil once," he said, words precise as scalpel cuts. "Brilliant, but corrupt. He threatened to expose certain philosophical indiscretions. I was at the university club until midnight, debating Kierkegaard with colleagues. They will vouch for me. Finally, there was Jens the porter, a squat man with shoulders like a bull and a face that might have been carved from teak. He stood apart, cap in hand, eyes fixed upon the carpet. When Larsen addressed him, he shook his head violently and touched his ears, then his mouth. Deaf and mute, or so it appeared. He delivered a crate to Eric's warehouse at 11:30. Larsen translated from the porter's frantic gestures, saw nothing, heard nothing, went home to his room above the stables. Poirot surveyed them all with the calm of a surgeon before the first incision. "Bon," he said, "let us establish the order of the evening. At 8 o'clock the family dined here, correct?" Freya inclined her head. A farewell dinner. Eric was leaving for Hamburg today on business. We were civil. Yet the captain quarreled with him at Tivoli later. Magnus flushed. A continuation, yes. Eric mocked my old ways, said steam had killed romance. I told him romance would not pay the dockyard bills. "And you, mademoiselle?" Poirot turned to Ingrid. "You were at the Royal Theatre?" "Rehearsing A Doll's House. Nora's slam of the door loses impact if one forgets the timing." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Professor?" "I dined alone at the club. Sol Veronique and a half-bottle of Meursault. I keep the receipt." Poirot's gaze lingered on the porter. "And Jens Christian Sørensen, your real name, I believe, was paid extra to deliver after hours. A crate marked fragile Greenland crystals. Curious cargo for a January night." Jens's hands moved rapidly. Larsen. Translated, he only carries, does not ask. The fire settled with a small explosion of sparks. Outside, the snow had begun to fall in earnest, muffling the world. Poirot paced before the hearth, hands clasped behind his back. "Let us consider motive," he said softly. "Eric Vandad was a spider at the center of a web. Money, yes, always money, but also fear. Each of you had reason to wish him silent." Freya's voice cut like a whip. "I fought him in court, monsieur, not in alleys." "Yet courts are slow, mademoiselle, and heirs impatient." Magnus growled. "I borrowed from the firm to refit the Freya. Eric held the notes. He could have ruined me." Ingrid dabbed at her eyes. "He promised marriage, then laughed when I spoke of settlements. My career—" "Careers can be rebuilt," Poirot interrupted gently. "Reputations, less easily. And you, Professor, what indiscretion weighed so heavily?" Kirke's knuckles whitened on the cane. A youthful folly, a monograph sold to a German publisher before the war. Eric discovered it, threatened scandal. Jens made a sudden gesture, 2 fingers slashing across his throat. The room stilled. Poirot smiled without humor. Exactement, the threat made visible. But the throat that was cut was Eric's, not yours. He stopped before the window. The snow blurred the view of the sound. Somewhere beyond, ships moved like ghosts. "One more thing," he said, turning. "Who among you possesses a green cloak with a hood lined in sable?" Ingrid's hand flew to her throat. "Mine was stolen from the theater 2 days ago." "Convenient," murmured Freya. "Or prophetic," said Poirot. Larsen stepped forward. "We will need statements, alibis confirmed. Herr Poirot, the warehouse." "Tomorrow," Poirot said. "Tonight I require solitude and a tisane. The little gray cells must digest this interesting company." As they filed out, Poirot lingered by the fire. He drew from his pocket the brass button found at Nyhavn and turned it in the light. The anchor, the initials VS, Vandad Shipping. Magnus's coat bore similar buttons, yet the captain had been home by 11, his housekeeper adamant. Somewhere in the house, a door closed with the finality of a coffin lid. Poirot replaced the button and addressed the empty room. "The spider is dead," he said softly, "but the web remains, and in its threads the fly struggles still." Chapter 4. The scene, revisited dusk, came early to Copenhagen in January, a slow bleeding of light that turned the sky the color of tarnished pewter. Hercule Poirot left the Hotel d'Angleterre at 4 o'clock precisely, refusing Inspector Larsen's offer of the police Daimler. He required solitude, he explained, and the rhythm of his own footsteps upon the snow. He wore his heaviest overcoat, the collar turned up about his ears, and a muffler of cashmere wound twice around his throat. In one gloved hand, he carried the ebony cane with the Malacca handle. In the pocket of his coat nestled the brass button and a small electric torch of the latest pattern. The fog, which had lifted slightly during the afternoon, now rolled in again from the harbor, thicker than before, carrying with it the smell of coal smoke, wet rope, and the faint, sweet rot of the canal. Nyhavn was almost deserted. The colorful houses had drawn their curtains against the night. Only a single tavern spilled a wedge of yellow light onto the quay. A ship's bell sounded somewhere out in the mist. 3 mournful notes, then silence. Poirot walked slowly, placing each foot with care upon the uneven cobbles. The cold bit at his cheeks, but his eyes were bright beneath the brim of his Homburg. He reached the spot where Eric Vandad had died. The police tape had been removed. The blood had been washed away by the street sweeper's broom. Yet Poirot could still trace its outline in the darker stains between the stones. He knelt, disregarding the damp that soaked through his trousers, and shone the torch in a slow arc. The beam picked out the usual debris of a waterfront: a broken bottle, a twist of tarred string, the silver belly of a dead fish. Then, something else. Half hidden beneath the lip of the quay, where the cobblestones met the iron bollard, lay a scrap of green wool. Poirot extracted it with tweezers from his waistcoat pocket. The cloth was fine, expensive, the color of deep forest. A single strand of sable fur clung to the torn edge. He sniffed delicately. A trace of perfume. Jasmine, heavy and theatrical. Ingrid Solberg's scent, or one very like it. He folded the scrap into a second envelope and tucked it beside the button. Rising, he surveyed the surroundings with the precision of a surveyor. To the left, the tavern, its sign, Den Güldene Hein, creaking in the wind. To the right, a narrow alley leading to the customs house and beyond the warehouse. Directly opposite, across the canal, a row of houses with gabled roofs and windows like watchful eyes. One of those windows, on the second floor of the Indigo House, showed a flicker of movement, a curtain falling back into place. Poirot crossed the small footbridge, his cane tapping a measured rhythm. The Indigo House was number 17. The brass plate read H.J. Muller, ship's chandler. He mounted the steps and rang the bell. After a moment, the door opened a cautious inch. A woman peered out, elderly, with a face like a dried apple and eyes sharp as gimlets. She wore a shawl of Shetland wool and held a candle that guttered in the draught. "God Afton," Poirot said politely. "I seek information concerning the unfortunate event of last night." The woman's gaze flicked to his mustaches, then to the cane. "You are the foreign detective," she stated, rather than asked. "Come in, then. The stairs are steep." She led him up a flight so narrow his shoulders brushed both walls. The room above was small, but meticulously clean. Ejikiza, table with a crocheted cloth, a stove of blue tiles, a shelf of Delft plates. A cat, black as midnight, regarded Poirot from the hearthrug with luminous disdain. "Fru Müller," she introduced herself, setting the candle in a brass holder. "My husband is at sea. I saw something, yes, but the police—" She shrugged. "They think an old woman imagines." Poirot seated himself upon the chair she indicated, removing his gloves with care. "Old women, madame, see more clearly than young constables. Tell me." She poured coffee from a pot on the stove, thick, black, scented with cardamom. Poirot accepted a cup with gratitude. "At 11 o'clock I was at this window," she began, settling opposite him. "I suffer from the insomnia. The fog was thick, but not so thick I could not see the lamps across the way. A man came, tall, in evening dress. He walked unsteadily, as though he had drunk aquavit. He stopped here," she pointed, "beneath the lamp. Then another figure joined him. Cloaked, hooded, green, I think, though the light was poor." Poirot leaned forward. "You are certain of the color?" "As certain as I am of my husband's snoring," the cloaked one spoke, words I could not hear. Then the tall man laughed, a nasty laugh. They moved together toward the warehouse. After that, nothing until the scream. Scream? Short, cut off, like a knife through butter. Fru Müller demonstrated with a swift gesture of her gnarled hand. Then silence. I waited. No one came. At 6, the sweeper found the body. Poirot sipped the coffee. It was excellent. "And the cloaked figure, did you see it leave?" She shook her head. "The fog swallowed everything, but earlier, yes, at 10 o'clock perhaps. A motor car, black, parked 2 streets over, engine running. I thought it odd." "Registration?" "Too far, but the headlights were masked, only slits of light, like a submarine." Poirot rose and crossed to the window. From this angle he could see the alley mouth, the customs house roof, and, dimly, the warehouse door. He noted the position of the lamp, the angle of the bridge, the exact spot where the body had lain. "Madame, you have been most helpful. One more thing. Did you notice a cane? Ebony, silver-topped?" Fru Müller considered. "No cane, but the cloaked one moved lightly, no limp." Poirot bowed over her hand. "My thanks. Should you recall more, send word to the Hotel d'Angleterre." Descending the stairs, he paused on the quay to light a small cigar. Egyptian, very mild. The fog curled around him like a living thing. Somewhere, a clock struck 5. He walked the length of the crime scene again, timing his steps. From the lamp to the warehouse door. 47 seconds at a brisk pace. From the alley to the bridge, 32. The scream at 12:05, according to the night watchman. Eric's watch had stopped at 11:45, shattered when he fell. He stood beneath the lamp and looked up. The iron bracket was old, the glass cracked. Something glinted in the crevices. A thread of green wool caught on a splinter. He retrieved it with the tweezers. Same cloth, same fur. A footstep sounded behind him, soft, deliberate. Poirot turned. A figure stood at the alley mouth, tall, cloaked, hood shadowing the face. For a moment, the fog held its breath. Then the figure melted backward into the darkness. Poirot did not pursue. Instead, he smiled into the mist. "Patience, mon ami," he murmured. "The trap is not yet sprung." He returned to the hotel through streets now almost invisible, the gas lamps reduced to glowing smudges. In his room, he laid out his finds upon the blotter, the brass button, the scrap of green wool from the key, the second scrap from the lamp, the thread from Fru Müller's windowsill. 4 pieces of a puzzle. Chapter 5. The Warehouse of Secrets. The warehouse of Vandad Shipping squatted beside the customs house like a black whale beached upon the stones. Its doors were tall enough for a cart and horse, its windows barred with iron and filmed with decades of salt. Snow had drifted against the lower wall in a smooth, unbroken curve. Only the police seal upon the padlock showed that human hands had recently disturbed the silence. Inspector Larsen arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, driving the Daimler himself. He carried a heavy ring of keys and a thermos of coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. Poirot, already waiting upon the quay, accepted a tin cup with murmured thanks. The coffee scalded his tongue and tasted of chicory and midnight. "Sleep well?" Larsen inquired. "Like a child who dreams of puzzles," Poirot replied. "And you, mon ami, you have checked the motor car?" 3 black cars in the area that night. One belongs to the Swedish consul, diplomatic plates. One to a doctor called out for a confinement. The third, Larsen's scar twitched. Registered to Fröken Freya Vandad. She claims it was in the garage at the mansion. The chauffeur confirms, but chauffeurs are loyal. Poirot nodded. "We shall see. Now, the warehouse." Larsen selected a key, and the padlock fell open with a clang that echoed across the water. The doors groaned inward on rusty hinges. A smell rolled out. Tar, damp wood, the ghost of spices long departed. Larsen switched on an electric bulb that hung from a beam. Its light was feeble, but sufficient to reveal aisles of crates stamped with destinations in a dozen languages. Reykjavik, Bergen, Archangel, New York. They moved between the stacks. Poirot's cane tapped a measured counterpoint to Larsen's heavier tread. At the rear stood a smaller door, painted green, with a Yale lock newly scratched about the keyhole. "Forced," Larsen said. "Our man used a jemmy. No prints, gloves." Inside was an office, a roll-top desk, a leather chair split at the seams, a map of the North Atlantic pinned to the wall with colored flags. Upon the desk lay a ledger bound in maroon cloth. Poirot opened it with reverence, as though it were a missal. Pages of figures, neat as a banker's, shipments of furs, saltfish, whale oil. Then, at the back, a section headed private. Here the entries changed. Names, dates, sums in Danish kroner. Freya Vandad, 15.9, 200,000. Signed Magnus Bjarnason, 311, 350,000. Note attached, Ingrid Zolberg, 22 Passa 12, 75,000. Contracts enclosed, Otto Kirke, 1-1, 150,000. Letters Jens Christian Sørensen, 1010, 5,000. Silence Poirot's finger paused at the last. Silence is golden, they say. Here it is priced at 5,000 kroner. He turned the page. The next leaf had been torn out with violence. Only a ragged edge remained. Larsen whistled softly. Blackmail. Eric was bleeding them all. Précisément. But the missing page. Who was the final victim, and why remove only one? Poirot lifted the ledger and shook it gently. Nothing fell out. He examined the desk drawers. Invoices, a bottle of aquavit half empty, a revolver with 3 chambers loaded. In the bottom drawer, wrapped in oilskin, lay a whaler's knife. Long, curved, wickedly sharp. The blade was clean, but a faint brown stain marked the juncture of steel and handle. Captain Bjarnason's speciality, Larsen murmured. He has a dozen such on display at home. Yet this one was taken from here, Poirot pointed out. See, the empty space upon the wall bracket. Someone knew the warehouse well. They searched further, behind a stack of crates marked Greenland crystals. Fragile, they found the iron-bound chest Jens had delivered. The lock was intact, but the hasp had been prized. Inside, not crystals, but bundles of American dollars, crisp and new. Smuggling, Larsen said. Eric was bringing in currency to avoid the exchange controls. Poirot counted rapidly. $50,000, enough to ruin several reputations if discovered, and enough to kill for. A sound disturbed them. Footsteps on the quay outside. Larsen drew his pistol. The door creaked wider. Fru Müller stood there, shawl clutched about her shoulders, eyes wide. "Forgive," she gasped. "I saw the light. There is something you should know." Poirot bowed. "Enter, madame. The warehouse is cold, but truth warms." She stepped inside, breath pluming. "Last night, before the scream, I saw a man leave by the side door, limping, but not with a cane. He dragged the foot, and he carried a bundle wrapped in green." Larsen frowned. "The professor limps, but uses his cane always." "Exactly," said Poirot. "So either the professor discarded his cane, or we have a second limper. Curious." Fru Müller produced a small object from her pocket, a brass button identical to the one Poirot had found at Nyhavn. "It fell from the bundle. I picked it up this morning." Poirot turned it over. Same anchor, same VS. But on the reverse, scratched with a knife point, MB. "Magnus Bjarnason," Larsen said. "Yet his housekeeper swears he was home by 11. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Swears, yes, but housekeepers can be mistaken or paid. Come, we have much to do." They locked the warehouse and returned to the Daimler. Larsen drove while Poirot made notes in a small leather book. 2 brass buttons, both from Magnus's coat, or 2 coats. Green cloak, torn, sable-lined, perfume of jasmine, missing ledger page, key to the final secret. Iron chest, dollars, smuggling. Whaler's knife, taken from wall, not Magnus's home. Jens, deaf, not mute. Lip reading. At the hotel, Poirot telephoned the Royal Theatre. The wardrobe mistress confirmed. 1 green cloak missing since Tuesday, sable-lined, belonging to Fruken Solberg's Hedda Gabler costume. Next, he rang the Van Dad mansion. The butler informed him Fruken Freya had gone to the lawyer. Captain Bjarnason was at the docks. Professor Kirke had called but left no message. Fruken Solberg was resting and could not be disturbed. Poirot replaced the receiver. "They scatter like pigeons," he murmured, but pigeons return to the loft. He opened his valise and removed a small magnifying glass. Under its lens, the scratches on the second button revealed themselves, not as MB, but MD, the loop of the B broken, making it a D. Magnus, or someone else, Larsen wondered. Someone who wished us to think Magnus, Poirot corrected. The button at Nyhaven was planted. This one dropped in haste. Our murderer grows careless. Larsen lit a cigarette. The scream at 12:05. If Eric died at 11:45, who screamed? An excellent question. Someone who discovered the body and fled in terror or guilt. Poirot stood at the window. Snow still fell, soft and relentless. Across the square, the statue of Bishop Absalon rode his horse eternally through the flakes. We must reconstruct the night, he said. Tivoli at 10:15. Magnus leaves Eric. Warehouse at 11. Green Cloak enters. 11:30. Jens delivers crate. 11:45. Murder. 12:05. Scream and flight. Body moved to Nyhaven between those times. Moved? Larsen echoed. But the blood. Some blood at warehouse, some at Nyhaven. The throat cut in the office, the body dragged to the quay to suggest robbery. The scream when the mover returned and found the police already there? No. The timing is wrong. He paced, hands behind back. No. The body was moved earlier, the scream later. Someone returned to the warehouse for the ledger and found... What? Larsen crushed out his cigarette. Another body? Possible. Or evidence they feared. We must search again. At night. With the fog. Poirot stopped. Tonight. But first I require a map of the sewers beneath Nyhaven and a boat. Larsen stared. You think the murderer escaped by water? I think, said Poirot, that fog is the perfect cloak, but water leaves no footprints at all. Chapter 6. The Night of the Fog. The fog that night was a living creature. It poured in from the Öresund, thick as wool, swallowing the city in a gray silence, broken only by the mournful bass of ships' horns and the occasional clop of a horse's hooves on distant cobbles. Hercule Poirot stood upon the Nyhaven quay at 11 o'clock precisely, wrapped in the Siberian wolf coat and armed with the small electric torch, the ebony cane, and a plan drawn in his neat, slanting hand upon the back of an envelope. Inspector Larsen waited beside a police launch moored to the iron rings. 2 constables, muffled to the eyes, stood ready with boat hooks. A 4th man, a rat-faced sewer inspector named Hansen, clutched a rolled chart and a lantern that glowed like a dying coal. We begin at the warehouse, Poirot said softly. The body was killed there, moved to the quay between 11:45 and 12:05. The murderer either walked through the streets, risking discovery, or used the water. The canal is tidal. At that hour the ebb would carry a small boat toward the harbor mouth. Larsen nodded. And the scream? Later. A second visit, perhaps. Or a witness who dared not speak until the fog hid her. They entered the warehouse through the side door. Hansen unrolled his chart upon a crate, a spider's web of lines showing the ancient brick tunnels that honeycombed the foundations of Nyhaven. Here, Hansen whispered, jabbing a grimy finger. A culvert runs beneath the office floor, opens into the canal opposite number 17, Fru Muller's house. Iron grate, but the bars are old. Poirot's torch beam danced across the floorboards. In the corner, beneath a pile of sacking, a square of planking had been prized up and replaced carelessly. Larsen lifted it. A draught of foul air rose, smelling of mud and centuries. Someone used this, Poirot murmured. See, the fresh scratches on the screws. They descended a rusted ladder into darkness. The tunnel was narrow, the brickwork slimed with green. Their footsteps echoed. Water dripped with the regularity of a metronome. Hansen's lantern threw grotesque shadows that leapt like imps. 20 paces along, the beam caught something white against the blackness. A lady's glove, kid leather, soaked and ruined. Poirot retrieved it with tweezers. Inside the cuff, embroidered in faded silk, I.S. Ingrid Solberg, Larsen breathed. Or someone who wished us to think so, Poirot corrected. The perfume, jasmine, clings still. But the glove is torn at the thumb. Our actress has perfect hands. She would never wear damaged gloves. They pressed on. The tunnel widened into a chamber where the canal water lapped at a flight of stone steps. A rowing skiff lay half submerged, tied to a ring bolt. The oars were shipped, the thwart smeared with a dark stain that might have been blood. Larsen scraped a sample into a vial. We will test, but the timing— Listen, Poirot said suddenly. From the warehouse above came the faint but unmistakable creak of a door. Footsteps, light, hurried, crossed the office floor. A drawer opened, papers rustled, then silence. Larsen drew his pistol. They climbed the ladder swiftly. The office was empty, but the roll-top desk gaped wide. The maroon ledger lay open at the blackmail pages. The torn edge where the missing leaf had been was now smooth, another page excised with a razor. Poirot knelt. Upon the floorboards lay a single silver knop, the head of Professor Kirk's ebony cane, snapped clean from the shaft. He was here, Larsen said, but how did he know we would come tonight? Poirot's eyes gleamed in the torchlight. Because I telephoned the mansion at 6 o'clock and spoke to the butler within earshot of the professor. I mentioned a night visit to the warehouse. Our murderer is impatient and frightened. They returned to the launch. Hansen cast off. The constable at the engine gave a cough and a sputter, and they moved out into the canal. The fog folded around them like a shroud. The launch's bow light picked out swirls of mist and the occasional black shape of a moored barge. At the spot opposite Fru Müller's house, they found the iron grate. One bar had been sawn through and bent outward, work of perhaps 10 minutes with a hacksaw. The tide had left a tide mark of blood, already fading. Eric was dragged down these steps, Poirot said, placed in the skiff, rowed to the quay, and arranged beneath the lamp. The murderer returned the boat, climbed back through the culvert, and fled. But the glove was dropped in haste. Larsen scanned the fog. And the scream at 12:05? Poirot pointed upward. A window in number 17 stood open a hand's breadth. A curtain stirred. Fru Müller saw the murderer return, perhaps to retrieve the ledger. She screamed. He fled a second time, this time on foot, dropping the cane head in his panic. They tied up and climbed the exterior stairs to Fru Müller's door. She opened before they knocked, candle in hand, eyes bright with terror and triumph. I saw him, she whispered. The professor. No cane, just the limp. He came from the water like a drowned rat. Went into the warehouse. Then the scream, my scream. I thought he would kill me next. Poirot patted her hand. You are safe, madame, but you must come with us now. The net closes. Back at the hotel, Poirot laid out the new evidence upon the blotter. The kid glove, monogrammed I.S., torn at thumb, the silver cane head, the sawn grate, the blood tide mark, the second missing ledger page. He telephoned the Royal Theatre again. The stage manager confirmed. Fruken Solberg had left rehearsal at 10:30, returned at 12:15, agitated, demanding her green cloak, though it was still missing. Next, he rang the university club. Professor Kirke had signed the visitor's book at 9:45, departed at 11 sharp, confirmed by 3 colleagues and the hall porter. Yet the warehouse was a 20-minute walk. Impossible. Unless, Poirot said, he left earlier and the book was signed for him. Or he never left at all. Larsen produced a small object from his pocket, a brass button, the third, found by a constable in the skiff. This one bore no scratches, but the shank was bent as though torn from cloth in a struggle. 3 buttons, Larsen said, all from Vandad shipping coats. Magnus has only one such coat, accounted for at home. Poirot twirled his mustache. Then we have 3 coats, or one coat passing from hand to hand like a baton in a relay. The murderer is clever, but not clever enough. Tomorrow we gather them all at the mansion. The fog lifts at dawn, mon ami, and with it the veil of mystery. He prepared for bed with his usual ritual, but sleep was long in coming. Outside, the fog pressed against the window like a blind eye. Somewhere in the city, a church clock struck 2, then 3. Poirot lay in the darkness, arranging and rearranging the facts like pieces upon a chessboard, where every move led to checkmate. At 4 o'clock, he rose, dressed, and wrote a final note in his leather book. The scream was Fru Müller's, yes. But the discovery was earlier. Eric's watch stopped at 11:45 in the warehouse. The body was moved immediately. The scream at 12:05 was the murderer returning for the ledger and finding the skiff gone, taken by another who knew his secret. He underlined the last line twice, then returned to bed. The little gray cells, satisfied, allowed him 2 hours of dreamless sleep before the pale northern dawn crept over the rooftops of Copenhagen. Chapter 7. The Little Gathering. The Vandad mansion had never looked more austere. Snow lay in a smooth, unbroken mantle across the lawns. The Øresund beyond was a sheet of hammered pewter, beneath a sky the color of cold iron. Inside, the great drawing-room had been prepared with the precision of a stage set. Chairs arranged in a semicircle before the marble fireplace, a long table laid with coffee, aquavit, and plates of delicate sandkager that no one would touch. A portrait of the founder, Captain Elias Vandad, glared down from above the mantel, his eyes as sharp as the harpoon he held. They arrived separately, summoned by Poirot's notes delivered at dawn. Freya Vandad entered first, black coat unbuttoned to reveal a dress of charcoal silk, her face pale but composed. She took the chair nearest the fire without a word. Captain Magnus Bjarnason followed, stamping snow from his boots, the naval coat hanging open to show a sweater darned at the elbows. His scar stood out livid against the weather-burned skin. Ingrid Solberg arrived in a swirl of perfume and sable, her green cloak, newly retrieved from the theater, thrown back over one shoulder. She carried a small lace handkerchief, which she pressed to her lips as though the room itself smelled of death. Professor Otto Kirke came last, leaning heavily on a replacement cane of plain ash. His eyes were red-rimmed, the hand that gripped the stick trembled. Jens the porter hovered in the doorway, cap in hand, until Larsen beckoned him to a stool near the window. The butler closed the double doors with a soft click that sounded, in the hush, like the cocking of a pistol. Poirot stood before the fire, small and immaculate, hands clasped behind his back. Inspector Larson took position beside the door, notebook ready. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, voice gentle but carrying to every corner. "We are met to conclude a tragedy. Eric Van Dad was murdered, throat cut with a whaler's knife, body arranged in Nijhaven beneath a lamp. Blackmail was the motive all believed, yet blackmail is a web, and the spider is dead. Who, then, profits most from silence?" He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Let us first establish the order of the night, precise as the ticking of a ship's chronometer." He moved to a small table, where he had laid out the evidence like a magician's cards. The brass buttons, 3. The scraps of green wool, the kid glove, the silver cane head, the ledger with 2 pages torn. 10:15. Captain Bjarnason leaves Eric at Tivoli after a quarrel, confirmed by 3 witnesses. 10:30. Fruken Solberg departs the Royal Theatre. The doorman sees her motor away in a taxi. 10:45. A black motor car, Fruken Van Dad's, is parked 2 streets from Nijhaven, engine warm. The chauffeur swears it never left the garage. Someone lies. 11 o'clock. Fru Muller sees Eric and a figure in a green cloak enter the warehouse. 11:30. Jens delivers the crate of dollars. He signs the log, leaves. 11:45. Eric's watch stops, shattered in the warehouse office. Between 11:45 and 12, the body is moved by skiff to the quay, blood at both places. 12:05. Fru Muller screams. She has seen the murderer return. Later still, the ledger is raided, 2 pages removed. He turned to Magnus. "Captain, your coat has lost 3 buttons, yet your housekeeper swears you were home by 11. Explain." Magnus flushed. "I have only one such coat. The buttons are old. Some may have fallen in the street." Poirot held up the 3rd button, shank bent. This was torn in violence, and this— He produced the 2nd, scratched MD. "Was meant to incriminate you. Someone borrowed your coat, Captain, or stole buttons from it." Magnus's great fists clenched. "I lent the coat to no one." "Yet someone wore it," Poirot said. "Someone who knew the warehouse, the culvert, the skiff." He turned to Ingrid. "Fruken, your cloak was stolen Tuesday, yet a scrap of identical cloth is found at the scene, another on the lamp, a 3rd in the sewer. And this glove?" He dangled the kid. "Leather, torn at the thumb. You have perfect hands. Whose hand, then, was imperfect?" Ingrid's eyes widened. I lost a pair last week. Anyone might have taken them." Poirot's smile was wintry. "Anyone who knew your monogram." He faced Freya. "Mademoiselle, your motor car was seen. You fight your brother in court, yet he holds debts that could ruin you. 200,000 kroner in the ledger. A motive." Freya's voice was ice. "I was home by 10. The staff will confirm." "They confirm what they are told," Poirot said softly. Professor Kirk stirred. "This is farce. I was at the club until midnight." Poirot pounced. "Signed in at 9:45, yes, but the hall porter now recalls you returned at 11:20 to collect a book you forgot. You left again at 11:30. 20 minutes to the warehouse. You limp, yet Fru Muller saw a limper without a cane. You broke your silver head in flight." Kirke's face crumpled. "Lies, all lies." Poirot lifted the ledger. "Your name, 150,000 kroner for letters you wrote in 1917, sold to a German agent. Eric threatened exposure, but there was more, the missing page." He produced a sheet from his pocket, smoothed it with care. "Retrieved from your wastebasket, Professor. Your handwriting, a new will, forged, naming you sole heir to the Vandad fortune, witnessed by a clerk you bribed. Eric discovered it yesterday. He confronted you at the warehouse. You cut his throat with the whaler's knife from the wall. You staged the body in Copenhagen to suggest robbery. You planted Magnus's button. You wore Ingrid's cloak to cast suspicion on her. You even tore your own glove to leave in the sewer. Kirke lurched to his feet. You cannot prove, but I can, Poirot said. Jens saw you. All eyes turned to the porter. Jens's hands moved rapidly. Larsen translated. He lip-read your argument through the office window, saw the knife. You paid him the 5,000 to keep silent, but he kept the crate receipt with your signature. Poirot produced the slip. Kirke's spidery scrawl was unmistakable. The professor's cane clattered to the floor. He lunged for the French windows, but Magnus's whaler arms pinned him like a vice. Larsen snapped on handcuffs. Ingrid fainted with theatrical timing. Freya poured aquavit with a steady hand and drank it neat. Poirot addressed the room. The scream at 12:05 was Fru Müller's, yes, but the true discovery was earlier. Eric's watch stopped in the office. The body was moved at once. The professor returned for the forged will and found the skiff gone, taken by Jens, who feared exposure. Jens rode to the police launch, left the receipt in the dead man's pocket, then vanished into the fog. He returned this morning when he knew the net closed on the true murderer. Jens nodded, eyes downcast. Larsen led Kirke away. The professor's sobs echoed down the corridor like a child's. Poirot turned to the fire. And so ends the affair. The spider is crushed, the web destroyed. Justice, mes amis, is served. Outside, the snow had ceased. A weak sun glinted on the sound, turning the water to molten silver. The fog was lifting at last. Chapter 8. The fog lifts. Dawn over Copenhagen was a pale, reluctant thing, the color of watered milk. Hercule Poirot stood upon the terrace of the Hôtel d'Angleterre, gloved hands resting upon the iron rail, watching the city awaken. The spires of the Vor Fru Kirke pierced a sky now washed clean of fog. Gulls wheeled above the harbor, their cries sharp and clean as breaking glass. A fishing smack chugged past the mouth of Copenhagen, its wake a silver arrow across the dark water. Inspector Larsen arrived at 7:30, coat unbuttoned, scar livid in the cold light. He carried a folder stamped with the seal of Copenhagen's Politi. Kirke has signed everything, he announced without preamble. The forged will, the knife, the dollars, everything. He even admits planting the buttons. Took them from Magnus's old coat in the warehouse cloakroom weeks ago, against the day he might need a scapegoat. Poirot nodded. And the scream? Fru Müller's, as you said. She watched from her window, saw Kirke return soaked and limping, thought he was a ghost risen from the canal. When he vanished into the warehouse, she screamed and fainted. The night watchman heard, came running, found nothing but the open culvert. By then, Kirke had fled through the sewers to a waiting taxi. Driven by the bribed clerk, no doubt, Poirot murmured. A neat confederacy, but greed undid them. The clerk talked when faced with 20 years for forgery. Larsen offered a cigarette. Poirot declined with a small shake of the head. Jens? He asked. Safe. We have him in protective custody until the trial. He lip-read Kirke's threats weeks ago, kept the receipt as insurance. When he saw the murder, he took the skiff, left the evidence, and hid. Brave man, for one who cannot hear the world. Poirot's gaze drifted to the colorful houses of Nyhavn, now bright as paint-box lids in the morning sun. Bravery takes many forms, mon ami. Silence can be the loudest courage of all. They walked together along the quay. The bloodstains had been scoured away. Only a darker patch between the cobbles remained, like a bruise beneath the skin. A street sweeper passed, whistling a jaunty tune. Children bowled hoops along the pavement. A woman in a red shawl opened shutters and shook a rug into the crisp air. At the warehouse, Larson paused. The dollars are confiscated. It's state property now. The firm passes to Freya. She has already dismissed the crooked lawyer and engaged new counsel. Magnus keeps the Greenland route. Ingrid returns to the stage with a new contract. And I suspect a new admirer. Poirot smiled. Love, like murder, is a matter of timing. They reached the Daimler. Larson opened the door, then hesitated. You leave today? The afternoon train to Esbjerg, the night ferry to Harwich. London calls. My little flat grows lonely without me. Larson extended a hand. Denmark owes you a debt, Herr Poirot. Poirot's grip was firm. Debts are best paid in coffee, Inspector. Real coffee, not the English variety. Larson laughed, the sound echoing across the water. Next time you visit, the best in Copenhagen is yours. The Daimler pulled away. Poirot walked on alone, cane tapping a measured rhythm. At the corner of Nyhavn and the bridge, he paused beneath the lamp where Erik Vandad had lain. He drew from his pocket the brass button, the first found in the crack of the stones, and turned it in the sunlight. The anchor gleamed. The initials V.S. caught the light like a wink. He placed it upon the sill of the lamp bracket, exactly where the green thread had been caught. A small offering to the city that had trusted him with its secrets. Adieu, Nyhavn, he murmured. Your fog has lifted, and with it the shadow of murder. At the station he purchased a first-class ticket and a paper bag of smokehager for the journey. The train south was punctual, the compartment warm. As Jutland unrolled once more, flat, silvered, serene, Poirot opened his leather notebook and wrote in his neat, slanting hand. Case closed. Motive, greed masked as scholarship. Method, theatrical misdirection with cloak, buttons, glove. Moral, the little gray cells triumph over the densest fog. He closed the book, adjusted the angle of his Homburg, and permitted himself a small sigh of satisfaction. Somewhere behind him, Copenhagen's church bells tolled 8 clear notes across the water, each one bright and true as a solved equation. The train gathered speed. The city dwindled to a colored postcard against the snow, then vanished. Hercule Poirot closed his eyes. The little gray cells, their work complete, settled into the gentle rhythm of the rails, carrying him home